I wanted to speak about two people. One, very briefly, Lewis Hill, who was our psychiatry teacher for all three of our years, and who at the last class that we had with him said, go out and do well, and remember that you have chosen to be in the presence of suffering. Then I wanted just to make a comment about the three female deans whom I have known well. We've heard a lot of description about Annette's behavior as a dean. Her successor was had the most quiet and unobtrusive means of managing things. I was on the faculty, part-time faculty then, and you'd be walking across the campus and she'd come up beside you and say, I've been thinking that we should do so-and-so, what do you think? And you'd say yes or no, or make some comment. And that's the way she settled so many things. And now we have an extreme contrast in the dean who is everywhere all the time, bringing up new things and engaging everybody very actively. And it's been fun to see that succession.
I find myself this weekend fascinated by the changes that have happened in relation to the power that the faculty has, the power that the students have. And I'm from the decade of the 70s, and one of my main memories coming to Smith was in my first year here, sitting in a cubicle in the computer science section, typing in faculty evaluations that were done by the students. I'd love to know who started that, because somewhere between 1970 and 1974, the student organization came to the conclusion that if we were to be able to evaluate professors as they evaluated us, we would need to be the ones doing the evaluations and processing them and giving them to the faculty. Well, we did that for several summers. I'm told that now not only is it done by the faculty here, but that the students are involved in the curriculum committees, that 80 of them come back in November to work on the curriculum. And I'm astonished at the changes that have happened here. And I'd really be interested in hearing how that came about, because it seems like there was an evolution. When I came, I didn't know where I'd be placed. I said I wanted to be on the East Coast, so I went to Cincinnati. By the time I left, people were coming knowing where they'd be. And I would love to know how that's evolved, because the organizational change that has happened on this campus is both awe-inspiring and very reassuring to me in terms of the direction that clinical social work is going in.
Without fear and all, we were all cordially expected to come to the Monday night lectures. And if we didn't come, we used to hide while everybody walked through the quad. And I remember trying to talk to my peers about how we would manipulate the faculty to conceal our dependency needs so that we would go to the right placement, and we knew we never could. And we were convinced that they were against us. And one of my friends fainted, actually, when she found out she was being sent to Easton, Pennsylvania. One other piece, when we started, there were 70 of us, and I remember in the opening greeting, somebody said, one of the faculty members said that we took 70 of you, we can only handle 60, but that won't be a problem. That's what happened to us. Actually happened. One little or two little vignettes about Yonata Feldman. I remember coming back and hearing Yonata Feldman, and people asked her, how do you work with people and how do you know how to understand people? How can we prepare? And she said, go read mystery stories. So that was one. One final piece about graduation. At that time, we decided to wear flowered dresses and have somebody play a guitar at graduation. We were allowed to be involved in how we wanted to have a graduation ceremony. But I'd just like to end telling a story about, since this is a gender weekend, about penis envy. When I was here, I had a much younger sister who came up, and she was 5 or 6, and Yonata Feldman was very old at that time. She was elderly, and she looked down at my 6-year-old sister, and she said, and what do you want to be when you grow up? And my little sister said, I want to be a cowgirl. And she said, no, you mean a cowboy. She said, No, I mean a cowgirl.
This was the year of active student organization and student protest, and that included an effort to have more control over whether or not we would write a thesis and whether Dean Parad and Libby would be here. It's a very active summer, and I saw Dr. Parad yesterday, and he said, couple of anecdotes. It was also the period of Vietnam War, Cesar Chavez and the grape strike. So for a few weeks, we didn't eat lettuce or have any grapes or fresh fruit. That was compromising. Memory of Irving Kaufman. I don't know if I can get through this. He taught psychopathology, differential diagnosis, and we were doing conversion, neuroses, and hysteria. And as an example, he used St. Joan of Arc. I was one of 3 practicing Catholics on campus. It was my first summer, and we were still attending Mass at St. Mary's. We waited till class finished and approached him quite angrily about the use of St. Joan of Arc as an example of psychopathology. And he could have answered in many different ways, but he was terribly gracious and listened to us and said there are many, essentially what we were learning this weekend about postmodernist constructivism, that there are many worldviews and that perhaps he was in error to make such a generalization. So I saw him yesterday and we reviewed that.
I just wanted to refer to somebody who isn't here and I guess was the most prominent person in our class, and that was Lydia Rappaport. And as I often prepare for some teaching now, and I look at some of Lydia's work, I remember the times that we studied together and did a group project, and what a special, special thing that was. And I also think of what she could have done had she been with us longer. But so much of what she wrote is so pertinent now.
Yeah, I didn't have anecdotes popping into my mind this morning, but I feel that as a representative of the people who were here in the late 60s, that I wanted to say something about some of the faculty we had, because I think we were maybe a little envious about all these famous old great ladies who had been around earlier. But I want to mention 2 faculty members that we had that meant a lot to me. One was Jerry Clairman, who taught at least in our 3rd summer, and was really, I remember feeling close to somebody who really understood things during his class. And the other person was Grace Gantor, who was a real character, who was so kind in so many quiet ways to so many different students in various ways, and I don't think I have the right stories to tell you about her, except I'll tell you that she was my thesis advisor, and I was very young when I was here, and I had some frustration over my thesis, and I remember bursting into tears, or at least, weeping, sitting across from Grace talking about my thesis. And she said, let me tell you a poem, or she recited a long Robert Frost poem to me about letting go, and it was called Wild Grapes. I mean, that's quite an unusual way to be helped along by one's research or one's thesis advisor. And she later called me out of the blue when she was dying because she had things she wanted to say to me. And so that was really an incredible thing. And I went to her memorial service at Temple University with Steve Ellis, who was a year behind me, the class of 71. And I don't think there were other Smith students at that memorial service. But, so those are, I just wanted to say that we had some great teachers later on also.
Biopsychosocial aspects were all included in the curriculum. A lot has been said about the casework and psychopathology courses that we had, not too much on normal development, but that was typical of the times. A person who made a great impact on all of us was Herman Stein, who gave the courses. Everybody remembers how terrific he was. He gave the courses in culture, administration. He gave a course in international social welfare. And in addition to all of that, he amused us tremendously. And I don't know how many of you remember the skit that he used to do on why people don't move to the back of the bus. Well, I'll tell you, both Clara Janitas, whom probably many of you know, who was also from our class, Clara Janitas and I both have discussed the fact that we never get onto a crowded bus in New York without thinking of Herman Stein and all the reasons why the people don't move to the back of the bus. There was an attempt to integrate the bio, but that wasn't being emphasized so much in the early 50s. And we had a medical information class that may have been only for the A students. You didn't take it, did you? Oh, you had it too. Yeah, it was on the birth of a baby, as if we were all going to go out and deliver babies. And I remember, I guess they wanted to use an audiovisual that wasn't very common in those days, and we saw a movie on malaria. And it was that I have not had opportunity to use, even though I spent half of my career working in healthcare. But I remember we learned all about the flies and how the transmittal of the malaria bug, the parasite, etc. And we also learned something in that movie about how to build certain kinds of wells, so you don't have the movie. So I mean, obviously I remembered it. It's just that unfortunately I haven't been asked to build a well when I worked in a hospital in New York. But it was really terrific. And then there was that well-known lecture that the physician gave us on contraception. And it was illegal in Massachusetts at that time to teach contraception. So we had to meet in a room where there were shades, and the shades were full. I think some of it was a bit of an affectation, but I remember it very clearly for the different methods of birth control. And one, of course, was abstinence was first, and that was the only one that was 100%. So see, we did remember things.